Yep. All right, I think we're good there. Should be recording, good to go. So I just wanted to get folks together to discuss oak wilt in Ohio. It seems to be, tree disease, urban, rural, forest health problem rise in a lot of places in the state. So I just wanted to bring us together as this initial group, just some folks that I thought have experience with oak wilt, have dealt with it here in Ohio or elsewhere, and just kind of talk through some things and some ideas moving forward of what we can do as far as education, outreach, recommendations to folks to try to manage it. So why don't we get started with welcome and introductions. What I'm looking for here is just name, what you do, your organization, and what your knowledge or experience with oak wilt is, if you have that. So I'll just start off. I think I know most everyone in the meeting, but my name's Tom Macy. I'm the Forest Health Program Administrator for ODNR Division of Forestry. I work here in our central office in Columbus, and work on a wide variety of forest pests and diseases. So oak wilt is one of those important issues that we work on. And yeah, just trying to get this group connected to help advance oak wilt work in the state. So we've dealt with oak wilt on some of our state lands, as well as trying to assist, service foresters and urban foresters when they encounter oak wilt. So that's sort of our role in it. I just want to hear from everybody else if we can go around the room here and then we can go to the folks online if that works. So want to kick it off?
Yeah, my name is Enrico Bonello. I'm in the department. I am a forest health specialist. My involvement with oak wilt is really non-existent, other than teaching and giving a session talks was in Northwest Ohio, where Amy sits, Amy Stone, because they've had an ongoing problem up there. So no practical experience in the sense of research.
Sound on this side.
Tom, we lost your sound.
Okay, let me move that speaker a little closer to you. Here.
Can they hear you, Tom?
Try now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Yes? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So, yeah, I come with the perspective of a practicing arborist in the central Ohio area. I have had experience with dealing with oak wilt in trees, infected trees, and their removal, processing the wood according to the recommendations and things like that. I'm also in close communication with quite a few oak wilt, so I hope to be able to share their perspective, and I'm really happy to be here. So thanks for inviting me, Tom.
Thank you.
Can you hear me online now?
Okay.
Yeah, they said they can hear you. Oh, yeah? Okay. I'm a forest health forester with the Division of Forestry. I work out of Hawking State Forest. And my experience with oak wilt is pretty light, but I've helped with collecting some samples from the field and sending them into the diagnostic lab. And that's basically the extent to which I've worked with oak wilt.
And what was your name again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Kayla Height.
Stephanie Miller. I'm the regional urban forester in Northwest Ohio. And but it's been confined to Lucas County pretty much. And so since Amy Stone is my guru up there, I've been a lot of my communities to her, and she's been an angel in helping them through. However, in the last 2 years, I've had it in areas where it's never been, not even when we had lots of it back in the 40s. And so we've had to come up with lots of creative ways to help tiny little villages deal with oak wilt, and it's a nightmare. Especially when there's, it's so there we are.
Mr. Reynolds, can you hear me? Forester for Central Ohio, started that position on Monday. I was in the Forest Health Program prior to that for 9 years, and so I dealt with oaks on several different occasions in a woodland setting, in a residential setting, and then questions on managing oak wilt.
Hello, Tyler Stevenson, ODNR, Urban. Yep.
It's cutting out, just so you know.
It's too far away and it drops.
How's this?
Perfect.
Tyler Stevenson, ODNR, Urban Forestry. I dealt with a small pocket oak wilt when I was a city forester in Michigan. Other than that, though, I get the reports from the urban foresters. We just had our Ohio Tree Care Conference last week, and we had a talk on oak wilt. It was jam-packed. Everyone raised their hand when when Chatfield was asking about dealing with oak wilt, who's dealt with it or who, has sent samples in and things like that. So it's definitely prevalent in multiple parts of the state. So I just felt like it'd be great to be on this too, so.
That works for group discussion. Hi, I'm Cotton Randall, ODNR Division of Forestry, over our private lands programs and pretty basic knowledge of oak wilt. But looking forward to the meeting.
Cool. All right, thanks everybody here in the room. I'm going to now kick it to the folks online. So I'll just name folks in the order I see them to go ahead and introduce yourself. So first on my list is Ryan Klester. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Ryan Klester. I'm a service forester with the Division of Forestry. I work up in Northeast Ohio, and I've been dealing with oak wilt since I started in 2017, mainly helping private landowners do sampling and then helping them put treatment on the ground and do tree removal or help them with the tree removal. So that's my experience.
Thanks, Ryan. Connie, next.
Good morning, all. Connie Hausman. I'm the Senior Conservation Science Manager in the Division of Natural Resources at Cleveland Metro Parks. Unfortunately, my very first exposure to oak wilt was just a few years ago in 2018, when a patch of oak wilt that had been more or less managed along a power line right of way started to encroach into our natural forest. And so that's where a little bit more heightened level of awareness and management started to occur. So our very first mitigation of that pocket occurred on that site, in which we did sort of a root graft barrier zone approach. And it was challenging because to access the site, we had to get between houses. So the park boundaries are sort of an issue for us. Since that time period, we have found additional locations. 3 of the 5 have all been adjacent to power line right-of-ways. And so we've been working with the power company to try to figure out best management practices and increase communication, because it's likely, like Tyler said, that in an urban environment, it's much more prevalent. But as people manage dead and dying trees, they're removed off the landscape before we even recognize that the cause for that removal was in fact oak wilt.
Yep, thank you, Connie. I've got Chad Fitton next.
Good morning. I'm Chad Fitton with the Wayne National Forest. My experience with oak wilt is very nil. So I'm all ears and yeah, anxious to hear all the wisdom in this audience, and because obviously it could be a tremendous concern if it gets into our forested areas, highly dispersed properties, very rural landscape, bisected with power lines. Yeah, it'd be a worst case nightmare on a forest that's in a very good way dominated by oak forests. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chad. I see Colette Gabriel.
Hi, everyone. Colette Gabriel here. I'm at the Ohio Department of Agriculture Laboratory, and I do a lot of testing for oak wilt.
Awesome. Thanks, Colette. Roger Hendershot. Oh, Roger may not have a mic, the computer that he's on. So Roger, yeah, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat to folks. But yeah, Roger's a forester with ODNR Division of Forestry in our forest health program, and works mainly in southeastern Ohio. And he's helped us out a little bit with collecting samples and working with landowners on trying to manage oak wilt a little bit. So next I see Jenny Juswick.
Yes, good morning. I work with the U.S. Forest Service out of St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm in research and development, and my experience with oak wilt goes back to 1978. I did my PhD on it at Minnesota, and I've worked on it since then, except for a 10-year period in the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s. My research has involved work on diagnosis, detection. I've worked on above ground spread by insect vectors and below ground spread control. And I've also done log treatments. There's a company I believe it's in Akron, Ohio, that exports logs. So I've worked with them with different treatments. And I've heard from private landowners, Toledo Parks people. I talked with Connie a couple of years ago. So I've had contact with what's going on in Ohio, but I haven't actually worked with the oak wilt on the ground in Ohio. But I have experience working with oak wilt in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, and New York. So hopefully I can be of some help to you. So nice to meet all of you.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Jenny, for joining us and helping guide us through this as we work on oak wilt here in Ohio. Okay, next I see Lorraine Sproul.
Good morning. I'm Lorraine Sproul. I work at Toledo Metro Parks. We've been doing oak wilt management since 2014. And at that time, we were doing management just in one of our parks. And since then, it's become pretty extensive throughout the at least Ohio portion of the oak openings region. We've helped manage on some ODNR property, the Milky Road Savannah, And actually at the Maumee State Forest, they just started doing some oak wilt management there for the first time this year also. So it's spreading pretty rapidly. It's a problem in our urban areas and our natural areas.
I see David McCann next.
All right, I'm there. Hi, everybody. David McCann. I'm with the Ohio Department of Agriculture. I'm the plant health lab director and the plant pathologist. And I've been isolating and identifying oak wilt for a number of years in West Virginia and Ohio.
Thanks, David. John Mueller.
Hi, everybody. John Mueller, work for the Division of Forestry as the Northern District Manager. And we have within our district, as Lorraine referenced, we have the Maumee State Forest, where we did a couple small mitigation efforts adjacent to one of the Toledo Metro Park properties. And unfortunately, we had a much more extensive infestation of this pest in Yellow Creek on the other side of the state that we're in the process of mitigating. We did a salvage, pre-salvage harvest that Ryan Klester helped us with. He was the brains on that operation. So the extent of what I have about as far as work with oak wilt comes mostly from those two instances.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Up next is Rachel Boyer.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Rachel Capoya. I'm the research assistant in the OSU Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic, and I do most of the diagnoses of oak wilt that we get in. And I've been working here for 3 years now.
Great. Thanks, Rachel.
You broke up a little bit, Tom. Was it for me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I'm Amy Stone. I'm an extension educator with Ohio State University up in Lucas County. I'll be celebrating my 30th anniversary in extension this summer. And for most of those years have had some interaction with oak wilt. It was in a small area in the city of Sylvania prior to me coming to extension. Davis Sidner came up and kind of updated me and kind of educated me on oak wilt in the very beginning, along with Jim Chatfield. And so dealing primarily with private citizens and trying to have, neighbors help each other in the process, making sure that the samples are confirmed with oak wilt if there's any question, and then also have helped a little bit in the metro parks, getting some samples down to the clinic, as well as some other parks in the county.
Yeah, I think the one I see here is Tim Gallagher.
Hey everyone, yeah, I'm Tim Gallagher, Toledo Metro Parks up in Northwest Ohio. We've been dealing with, I work closely with Lorraine and Amy. We've been dealing with it up here, like I said, since 2014. We learned a lot by visiting Minnesota. I think it was Three Rivers, kind of helped us get started with the trenching and the sanitation and so forth, and the water utilization. So we started, we had it on one particular preserve where it was starting to spread. It had been kind of hanging out there for a while. And since we started in 2014, Lorraine could probably speak more to the number of individual areas, but it's been a frustration there. Even despite our efforts, it's just continued to grow throughout our areas of responsibility. So kind of looking to see what maybe comes from this group. Glad to see Jenny's here. She's been a great resource for us as well too. So thank you for hanging out with us.
Thank you, Tim.
Jenny and David Apple. Jenny, pretty much. Jenny, can you hear me?
You were cutting out, so I didn't hear everything you said.
Now that you and David Apple down in Texas are really the two experts we have in the country right now on oak wilt. So that's great.
Yeah, certainly. So, yeah, so looking out the agenda, I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of, how I see a need for this group, and maybe, what we could collaborate on. And obviously we'll get into a lot more of that later in the meeting. Thanks, Scott. Can folks hear me okay? So, I think everyone kind of recognizes that, there is a need to try to, get more resources towards oak wilt in the state. So that's kind of the reason that I brought all of us together today to start talking about this. I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear if any of you all have ideas on what could be done with oak wilt and how we can improve on all aspects of it. And obviously it's a tough one because there's so many, I guess, sectors involved. You've got tree care, arborists, working with landowners and towns. There's the utility management side of it, power line, gas line right of ways that could be a major, vector of oak wilt, so to speak. You've got, diagnostic labs, the need for confirming it through lab confirmation. And then there's just the whole management containment side of it. So I feel like, it'd be good to bring together all the partners that are sort of involved in one of those aspects or another, to try to standardize how we're gonna tackle this issue in the state. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone, and you kind of, are in agreement with that, and like to hear from folks if they think that's on target, if we're missing people or partners. But this is kind of just my first attempt to bring the core group together to start thinking through this idea. So that's where we're at with that. Does anyone have any initial comments other than, what you just discussed in the introduction?
I was just gonna.
Yeah, I can't hear.
Utility rep on the group, like someone from AEP or another major utility, just because I feel like they're probably one of the bigger. I can't say that positively, but just during growing season, I'd imagine utilities are a big spreader of this. So maybe having someone on from AEP or First Energy or one of the bigger utilities or even a smaller utility would be.
Any utility contractor that does power lines should be involved.
Yeah, whether it's a utility or the contract, very different.
Right.
Yeah, true, good point.
Yeah,
Yeah, so maybe.
Utilities. Maybe.
Yeah. And so I hope folks heard that, but yeah, the recommendation to get utility company involved, whether it's, a big one like First Energy, Columbia Gas, AEP, and not only them, but their contractors that are doing that right of way work for them. So I agree. I think that is a really important partner to try to bring into this.
Tom.
Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
I'm happy to share our contacts at First Energy up here in Northeastern Ohio. Like I said, we have an access permit with them. And so we drafted an agreement in which If they notice any trees in decline that they would like to have tested, we mobilize to go out and test when they're adjacent to our park. So we send up a climber to be able to take samples and test. And Colette's been awesome at ODA to help us do that testing. Additionally, I've not made this request yet, but they're well aware of the fact that there's an issue, and I'm going to be requesting data for when they send out their arborists on a more frequent cycle than their general vegetation management, which depending on whether or not it's transmission or distribution lines, it tends to be every 4 years. So if they're doing oak work more frequent than their typical rotation, they're going to let us know those sites when they're in proximity to our park system. So they've been engaged in this conversation, at least with us. So I think they'd be a good source. But you're absolutely right. The contractors on the ground are much more of whether or not they're minding their P's and Q's when they're doing and executing that work, in which case maybe Tyler would be the good resource to try if you guys have contacts from the urban forestry. Asplund tends to be, you know, a contractor that is hired regularly, or we can at least ask those various energy companies who they contract with. You know, they're at least on a yearly contract with them, and they tend to win those bids regularly. So I feel like, you know, at least the big players in I don't know, what are all the other, Van Curian is the big one up in our area, Davy, Asplund, you know, Toledo, I don't know who you guys tend to use over there or see regularly doing consulting tree work. But yeah, I'm happy to share some of those contact names.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I just had some initial thoughts. So the way you manage oak wilt is not a mystery at this point. I think what you need is an extensive education program for like the utilities you were talking about and the urban foresters, the arborists, and so on. Detection is essential, and so I don't know what capacity we have in Ohio. I know that Jenny was working on very advanced tools. I'm also working on some advanced tools for detection that, however, would require more research and therefore more funding. And I don't know if that would be possible at any level. And then I would suggest that risk mapping would be an excellent investment of efforts and resources. We are working on developing risk mapping tools for BLD at the moment, and many of the same tools could be used to mapping for other diseases. So we will develop pipelines to do that. That may come in handy for something like oak wilt, but whoever does it, I think risk mapping is essential because you really want to figure out where the disease is likely going to be. So you can go in and actually see if it's there already or be on, right? Depending on the environmental conditions and other parameters. So I would say those are the top line concepts, I think, that really need to be taken.
Yep. Definitely, I agree. So I guess kind of relating to that, the sort of the mapping side of it, that's kind of the next section of the agenda that I wanted to touch on. So, you know, I think when I kind of polled you all in that online form that I had you fill out, the sort of improved mapping of oak wilt in the state was one of the top things that people indicated, you know, we need or could improve upon. So, you know, I know there's kind of the historical map of all known oak wilt cases across the state. You know, and that map is helpful in that it shows where oak wilt has ever been detected. But, you know, I think those records go way back to the 50s or earlier. So I think it would be good to start doing a better job tracking where it's being found now, you know, in recent times. So I guess with that, I'm curious to know, I know like Colette there and the OSU lab, you all have shared with me kind of your records of where you've all, you know, received confirmed samples from around the state in the past. So can any of you kind of just comment on like what data you guys save as far as location data when you confirm a sample, and do you keep records? And, you know, I guess you've shared it with me, so I guess you're okay with sharing that. But if you would just maybe just briefly touch on how you keep those records and how that could potentially be shared.
At the OSU clinic, we have our records in PDIS in terms of like what county the samples come from. But, you know, sometimes if the sample is being sent in on behalf of someone else, like a client, we might not know exactly where that tree was. And I guess that's something that we could definitely improve on, following up with the submitter to know exactly where that tree came from. Because, I mean, it might not even be from the same county, depending on who's sending the sample in from where. We do keep records. And then we have online on the website, we post all the results that we have. So anybody can go on the PPVC website and look at our weekly summaries and see if we're finding oak wilt on a week-by-week basis.
Rachel, is there an archive for the?
I couldn't hear after archive.
Sorry. Is that only on a week-by-week basis, or is there an archive where an arborist, say, could search for the last year or 2 years within an area?
Right now, I mean, it's week by week, like you can go back and look at each week, but I do think that we could probably compile it like by year or something like that. I'd have to probably check if we have any kind of anything that might prevent us from doing that, but we could probably compile that data so it would be more searchable.
Yes, to make maps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, the thing that
I'm sorry, we can't hear anything.
about that, I guess my voice doesn't carry.
I just wanted to let you guys know at ODA, we request that any like sample that comes in has a GPS coordinate of where the tree was sampled from. So most of our samples obviously do not come from homeowners, but they mainly come from the forestry department. And sometimes extension, depending on what it is. But yeah, every tree is pretty much located GPS wise. And then that gets saved into our database, and all of our samples that are positive end up going to Michigan for further testing. They test, they're doing a bunch of research up there.
I think that one of the reasons why this mapping is so critical is because EAB was fairly predictable. We could do an overlay of where people moved, where people took firewood, where people stopped by the highways, where gypsy moth had been, and you could it's showing up in spots that I never would have guessed before. And so mapping is critical to see where neighborhoods are popping up, and so we can begin to see some patterns if there are any. Because right now it just seems random, and so I think I just.
Yeah, it's cutting out again, but I know that when you talk about random, I've talked with different arborists before, and I know that, if they're not cleaning their tools, whatever they're using to trim trees or just like remove trees, and then they go somewhere else and trim trees, I mean, they're pretty much, it might not necessarily be near each other, but they are close and like they're traveling to different locations and potentially spreading, disease that way if they're not cleaning in between sites.
Don't believe the oak wilt spreads through tools. It's overland by the Natula beetle and underground through root grass.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
No, it could be spread through tools. If you trim off a branch that has it in it, it very easily could be spread by that tool, just like any fungus.
Very mixed.
Jenny, do you have? input on-
Yeah, this is Jenny. We had this discussion at the recent Penn State University Extension Oak Wilt Management webinar. And really, there's not a lot of documented evidence to say oak wilt is being spread on, say, arborist pruning tools or through chainsaws. In fact, there's some old literature that where researchers tested it, it did not happen. But Dave Apple spoke up at that webinar though and said in Texas, he doesn't believe that, say, arborists are spreading it, but he's not opposed at all to arborists carefully cleaning equipment between sites. He just thinks it's a good practice in general, and I agree. But there really is no evidence that shows that arborists are spreading the oak wilt fungus on their chainsaws or pruning tools.
They're just producing wounds. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very true, Enrico. The wounds that are created, especially if they're wounding during the high risk, if they're pruning during high risk times of the year.
So if I may, that gets us back to the mapping. I think
Can you pass the microphone around when you guys ask questions? That would be.
We're gonna move closer to the mic when we talk.
okay, now I can speak quietly. Can you
Yeah, we
hear
can
me?
move the tables.
Can everyone hear me now?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. So at the Ohio Chapter ISA Tree Care Conference, which was last week up in Cleveland, there was a speaker, and I cannot remember her name. She was from OSU Extension, I think.
Amy? Or not Amy, Ann?
She was
Ann
an amazing.
Shandon.
Yeah, an amazing speaker. She was giving an update on invasive species, particularly the spotted lanternfly. I was sitting with a group of arborists, they're local arborists, and we actually asked about using the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app for oak wilt. And so we asked her a series of questions in the context of oak wilt. And it seemed to be a wonderful tool because any user can download the app and take photos that are, have GPS coordinates associated with the photo. Once that tree is confirmed, it's entered into the website, and then any arborist can look at a map to see where are the documented oak wilt positives in their area. Because I can speak confidently that most of the arborists who carry good credentials actually really, really care about doing the right thing with oak wilt, but they find themselves limited, not having the information that they need. So the mapping, I think the mapping is coming up as a major improvement that we could campaign for.
Yeah, and I guess one thought on that, if folks are using the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app, for example, to report oak wilt cases, like, I guess my thought is, we would want to make sure they're not making a report until they have that lab confirmation, right? I mean, so I don't know if there needs to be any sort of, like, at what point does it go into the app? I guess once they get that report back, or you wouldn't want people reporting suspected oak wilt before they have it confirmed. So does the app need documentation of that?
I thought there was a thing in there where.
Speak louder.
I have not used the app, so I'm not sure of this, but when we were talking about it at the conference, they said you report it, it doesn't actually get uploaded to the map where everyone can see it until it's been verified.
Okay.
And I guess that would come with a positive ID from a test, but.
Okay.
So for the spotted lanternfly, for example, saw an insect that looked like a lanternfly and they posted it, that doesn't get uploaded into the website. Sighting. So I
Okay.
suppose we would have to figure out is the positive oak wilt, and then
Okay.
I need to restate some.
Yeah. So, he was just mentioning that, it seems like with that app, there would have to be some verification before it gets posted publicly. So we'll have to think more about that. But, trying to, yeah, but I guess then, another piece to this that I was thinking about is, you know, we've got the OSU clinic, we've got the ODA lab that are, you know, testing and confirming samples. But I guess what we don't know is where, you know, are other labs being used, you know, outside of Ohio, and that's tougher to track. You know, where are those coming from? And I guess right now there's just really no way to know.
So I think training is gonna be fundamental. With the training, then, there should be clear indications where the samples need to go, because you need to document. And by the way, question for the clinics, do you guys do PCR on the wood samples, or do you do isolations first?
Isolations first.
OSU, we generally do PCR straight from the wood.
Okay, and is that reliable?
I believe so.
What PCR method are you using? A traditional nested protocol or?
Yeah, we do a nested protocol with the ITS 1 and 4 primers, and then CF01 and 02.
Yep. Yep.
Has anybody, sorry about the technicalities here, but has anybody developed qPCR methods?
Yes, Enrico. The Canadians have a multiplex qPCR protocol, and a commercial lab in Texas has one as well, RAL, but they won't give us the details. And also a different approach is being undertaken right now. There's a group working on LAMP for in-field testing, but that's not available yet.
I think LAMP will be critical for in-field testing, because then people can actually do it in the field and upload the diagnosis right there and then to the map. So I think it's necessary to have training so that the samples go to the right place, the protocols are the right ones, and we need both historical and present distribution data. But again, I would like to stress the need for risk mapping, because you can really sort of circumscribe your efforts in the areas that are most likely to develop the disease.
Yeah, and I think that what that brings up is we need one place for the mapping.
Yeah.
Yeah, one place. And also there are issues with the Ohio testing. Because Something is sent, or they get sent back and they refuse to test it at OSU.
Well,
So
the lab
so-
test in Texas may be more sensitive because they are using
Right,
Yeah,
and so,
the PCR.
so that is something we need to address, is because we would have missed several in Northwest Ohio had they not sent it to the Texas lab as a backup.
Let me, this is Jenny again. There is a discussion going on across the Northeast about inconsistent results between the Texas lab, RAL, and the NPDN labs. We're getting mixed results, and unfortunately, we don't have enough information from the results that are sent from the commercial lab to the submitter to know what they even what was even sampled, et cetera. So NPDN is now, I just got an email this morning, they're setting up a national ring test for diagnostic labs that are involved in diagnosing oak wilt. And we'll have a first meeting shortly, but just wanted to let you know, so we can standardize protocol and at least know how to properly interpret the results you get from whatever lab you send it to. It's a problem.
Just to add on to what Jennifer said, that is, depending on what people send as a sample, makes a huge difference. So if you send a sample from a tree, but you send something completely different to a different lab, the results could easily vary because it just might not show up in that branch, or it might show up in the branch they sent to this lab, but they sent a clean branch to another lab. So that's a huge deal, and something, anytime anyone asks, I let them know, when you're sampling a tree that you're concerned has oak wilt, you need to make sure that you're actually sampling branches that are symptomatic, not just any branch, because that'll change the results.
And even
So-
timing of when you take the sample.
Yes.
Is important. So yes, I think sampling is an aspect that really has not been addressed fully. And even for samples that come into NPDN labs, it'd be good to know more details on that sample.
So one of the challenges we've had, go ahead.
Diagnostic issue because it's critical. So there's also differences in detection if you isolate first, right? I don't know what the lab in Texas does, but they may well have a lot of false positives for all we know, right? I think it's critical, in my opinion, and I don't know what Jenny thinks, but it's critical to go past the isolation step, because even if the fungus is dead in the tissues, if you can detect the DNA, it means it was there at least at some point. And so that can constitute a disease center, right? So I think it's really critical to come up with, as Jenny was saying, standardized protocols that are very sensitive. And I think you need to move away from isolation, in my opinion.
I just want to say one of the problems we have had at Metro Parks is it's been we've sent in samples, and it's been the sampling and diagnostic has been frustrating. Rachel has worked with me to really help us understand how to get a good sample, but it's tricky. And if people are depending on that positive to make a decision, I think that's one of the challenges too, because getting a positive, our experience has been getting a positive result, and we're 100% confident that these are trees that have oak wilt, but getting that positive has been a big challenge. And part of the reason we want it is just for that confirmation for the public, and but there are other situations where we want to get a positive because it's a more urban tree. And we do want that positive so that we have a better understanding of what to do, like that next step. And it's just been a challenge to get it. And I know, Stephanie, I think you're the one that's worked with the small municipality in Lindsay. And I don't know, I've talked to one of the ladies on the tree commission there also, and she got a positive from the Texas lab. And I don't know what the photos looked like, Stephanie, that you ever saw, and you might have actually seen the tree, but the photos that she sent to me of these trees didn't look like oak wilt at all. And I would have never guessed that they were oak wilt trees. And I would even question whether they were, even with a positive sample. But they're making decisions then based on that positive sample to potentially cut down all of their oak trees, or at least all of their red oak trees. So that's the other thing. We don't want people making those types of aggressive decisions if it's not necessary.
Very troubling, and it's happened in 2 of my small towns that we're like, oh geez, the disparity in the tests are, because I've been there when they've taken the samples, and we've sent parallel ones, one to Ohio State, one to Texas, and one positive, one is negative.
Yep.
And multiple trees are positive and from Texas, and so yeah, it's really troubling.
I would be very, very cautious with the Texas company from what I'm hearing.
Let's just stop using them.
Well, yeah, but they're the reason they're being used is it's $18 a sample, correct? Or it may have gone up a few dollars. It's cheap.
And it's a very fast turnaround.
And it's very fast
Extremely
within a
fast.
day. And they provide CT values, Enrico, so we know they're doing a qPCR method. But that's about all they tell you. It's positive, the CT value was this. So it's hard to interpret.
So maybe at least as the state of Ohio is concerned, and perhaps we can lean on OSU and ODA to help us craft sampling recommendations. Like, let's establish a proper field protocol for number of branches, size of branches, location in the tree, make all of those, best collection recommendations, and then also add all the information of recommended labs. So it's not to say that you don't have to use Texas, but if there's this concern, I have always sent all of my samples to ODA, and Colette and David have been awesome, and readily available and sharing information as quickly as they can. I mean, there is a little bit of, you have to be patient, but is there a significant management decision that needs to be made within 7 days that you can't be a little bit patient on a culture?
Well, I know we're a little bit past our scheduled break, so maybe we'll pause here. And I think that was a lot of really good discussion and a lot to continue following up on after today's meeting. So we'll definitely make note of all this and keep the conversation going. But yeah, a lot of good stuff and a lot of good sharing. I appreciate that. So let's maybe break and start back at like 5 after, just a 5-7 minute break here. And we'll start at 5 after 11.
I have a question for Rachel though. Rachel, you still there?
Yeah.
You guys have an RT-PCR machine?
There's one in the lab, but I don't know that we have stuff to use it. We don't really do that in the lab. I think Colette might use it for some of her other samples, like maybe for phytoplasmas or something, but we don't
I use
really
it for different ones.
Okay, thank you. So it's not huge expense for shoe lab. That's why they have the parks. and stuff.
Oh, yeah, wildlife, are you kidding?
They
Yeah,
got hunters, Mike.
tours and tickets all day long, all the. I am trying to help this town and we ended up,
Whether right or wrong,
That's it, why?
they said they couldn't, it wasn't good enough sample.
Oh,
Yeah.
Because-
But
see, that's
we
because-
We followed the instructions.
that's
exactly.
because it's, so in order to isolate, you have to have the right location on the tree at the
Yeah.
right time. The
Right,
tree, the tissues must be alive.
I have.
So
Yeah.
there's all these steps before you can actually detect. And you should just do straight PCR, and the best way to do it is a qPCR test. So if the labs machine, and somehow we developed a good protocol to do that. If we get, the right sample at the right time and all that kind of stuff. If that time frame where you have to isolate, grow the fungus out, and then identify it.
On the OSU. Have you, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. So, yeah. 'cause
that's what they said. They isolate
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
Well,
Because,
let me say it a
and
different way. though.
our towns are willing to pay for it.
Sounds like the ODA does the isolation, but Rachel at the OSU clinic does the direct. It's a PCR, it's called, so it's a classic technique. That's what I'm saying. Maybe if there was a way. that- So there's a lot of benefits to improving the. Training, right, we're talking about the testing, the diagnostics, and the mapping.
Mhm.
Right.
Once
We
you
have to make
once
sure
you
the
have that-
diagnostics are reliable
Yeah.
first.
Yeah,
Yeah, otherwise I've
absolutely.
got.
And
places that
actually,
are positive and
that-
they're not.
that
Yeah.
Penn State webinar that Jenny mentioned, I was tuned into that too, and there was some discussion about this Texas lab and both a guy that works for Texas Division of Forestry and Urban Forestry there, and oh, no, her name's escaping me. She's with Cornell Diagnostic Clinic.
Karen Stover.
Yeah, they try to test it out and use their labs and also send from the same sample to the Texas lab and found that exact same thing. They came back negative, Texas came back positive.
For one reason,
Exact same thing.
arborists may feel inclined to think that the lab is better. Be something wrong with,
right.
with the positives.
Yeah, they also don't know that, So they were isolating, I think they were only. That's when they started sending samples. So I've been telling the guys I talked to, they're testing.
Okay.
Okay, so as long as people come to a central place, I can just.
Okay, yeah.
On the basics. Okay. Also,
Yeah, I just pulled that up, and I mean, it looks good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the past 40 years.
I'll say the only kind of, from what I can see, new development is the potential option for doing the herbicide treatments instead of the trenching, which I know the Forest Service is starting to look at, some researchers. If the trenching isn't, and I guess that's kind of the next thing we'll talk about. Killing the tree standing, like chainsaw girdle and then spraying, and then spraying herbicide. Yeah, I know, I think it's Dustin Bronson with the Forest Service that has started doing some research on that. I think it's, as totally effective as the trenching is.
Yeah,
That's the tried true gold standard. You're severing those root grafts.
Are there good data on the?
There's some good data starting to come out from him, and Jen could probably. I think they're finding that the girdle and herbicide, it doesn't always completely kill that root system. So you may have to go farther out with your buffer or.
Well, Tom, if I can interject Dustin's work, they only get a 50% success rate if they have more than a few trees. If they have an oak wilt center of more than, 2, 3, 4 trees, they really don't get good success. And so, that's a lesson that you try to catch it early, catch a center early and treat it. Don't wait until it's large. But girdle herbicide has a use in areas where you certainly can't get a plow into, and you're not concerned about sacrificing, trees out to your whatever line you choose to put in as the edge of your barrier.
Percent success rate is when you have one tree or when you have multiple trees?
Well, Dustin's work, they did I forget how many, 40 to 50 sites they treated. Their success rate was dependent on how many trees were in that initial center, Enrico. And basically, they could get in the 80% success rate if they had only 1 to 3, say, trees in their initial oak wilt center. But once they were treating larger pockets, their success rate dropped down to 50%.
So I guess we're back from break now, and we're kind of moving into this next section. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. There we go. Okay.
Can I ask one more question as far as the 2 labs? What's the difference in pricing? So how much does it cost to send a sample to OSU and ODA?
Ours is, so if we're just doing one sample, technically our rate is $50 a sample for the PCR, but we try to wait until we have a couple of samples. And then we'll do $20 a piece if it's like a group rate, just because the reagents for the PCR, to do just one, it costs us more. So I'd say most of the time will be about $20 a sample.
Most of our samples don't usually come from the general public. Most of them come from foresters, and we tend to have like as you know, we only do the culture isolating, so we tend to only do, I believe it's 20 as well, but we do not do the PCR.
Thank you.
That was ODA.
Quick question, Rachel. just to make sure I'm following correctly, Dr. Bonello, during the break was suggesting that the isolation step be waived and just go right into the PCR test. How do you feel about that?
I mean, personally, I find isolation less reliable than the PCR, and sometimes you just get like, especially if the sample is like older and more dead, you get too many like secondary things growing on it that can either that just like will outgrow any oak wilt that might be in there. I am okay with waiving the isolation. I mean, if we were doing research on, the genetics of which oak wilt was infecting where, then, we'd need to do that. But if it's just for a positive or negative, we are usually okay skipping any isolation. We will save the sample if we get a negative.
I got to weigh in on this. I got to weigh in on this. Most people know how I feel about isolation versus PCR. And Rico said that, and it was clear, and other people have noted that you have a chance with false positives with PCR. There is no chance for a false positive if you have the culture in your hand. Zero chance. If you have the culture in your hand, you know it's there. If you don't get the culture out, yeah, you could have a false negative, but you can get false negatives from PCR too. So you're eliminating the possibility of false positives right off the bat. And it really doesn't take that long to isolate. Within a week, you'd probably have a good culture to identify. And then it's reliable. If you have the culture in your hand, I'm going to beat this home. If you have the culture in your hand, that's a positive, and that can't be denied. But if I'm given a graph where a CT value tells me it's there, I'm going to be skeptical right off the bat. That's just my opinion.
I will say that we often will do a culture if the symptoms look a lot like oak wilt, but we get a negative, we will culture it as well, because we want to have that. We want to be sure about that. So we sometimes do culture it. It's often dependent on what the sample looks like, if it's even good enough to culture.
So
there definitely is a place for PCR. I've worked on Long Island, New York, when they first detected oak wilt in 2016. Long Island, they had storm damage at that time from Hurricane Sandy. They had gypsy moth defoliation. They had drought and two-line chestnut borer and oak wilt. When you have a mixed situation like that, a PCR was the only way they could detect it. It's just too difficult. So it comes down to what someone said, the type of sample you can get is really can dictate whether maybe you need to go with PCR only. So New York has never gotten an isolate, or the Cornell lab has never gotten an isolate of the oak wilt fungus from Long Island, but they sure know how to isolate it because they get it from spots in northern upstate New York. There's a place for both.
So I'm coming from the perspective of the folks that are collecting the samples. So from my perspective, the easiest way to collect the sample with the smallest learning curve is probably going to be the best, and then whatever that is, side.
I guess I can touch on this real quick. I sent Colette, I don't know how many samples a few years ago, and the majority of them came back positive. And that's because I was taking samples Monday or Tuesday, sending them overnight right away, keeping them cold, telling Colette, hey, they're coming in the mail. They'll be there. I made sure that these samples looked like they definitely had oak wilt symptoms on that branch. And I took, I don't know, 8 to 10 samples a tree. I made sure they were the size between my thumb and my wrist, and they were at least 10 to 12 inches in length. And I'd say 80 to 90% of them came back positive. And if I can do it, I think anybody can do it, because, it's really not that difficult to do it the right time of year.
I tend to be in agreement with that comment.
And to add on to Ryan, the time of the year is a huge, huge factor, because if it's anywhere near fall, if there's any changes in the leaves, then, you know, that's going to be very, very deceiving for anyone who's sampling a tree. The other thing too is, I don't know how many of you know about Xylella, but we have bacterial leaf scorch, which is Xylella in Ohio as well. And those symptoms can be mistaken for oak wilt, but the overall symptom on a whole tree differs from oak wilt. Where oak wilt, you might have patches versus Xylella is not as patchy. But it could also change too. So I know I talked to Tom a long time ago about, you know, if there's any doubt that it's oak wilt, but the leaves look suspect, maybe send in leaves too. And then that can get tested for Xylella. And that way you kind of know, hey, it's not oak wilt, it's Xylella, in case it ever becomes a problem.
So another scenario while we're on this topic, a tree that is already dead, but I was oak wilt or not, is so I can properly dispose of the wood, or treatment for adjacent trees on the property. So that the time of year, you know, we may not be time of year, or there may not be a sample with a transition zone from dead to live that can be isolated.
So I would say that anything that is dead, culturing will not work. I mean, if it's dead, then the idea that, you know, whatever's living in it that needs it to be alive for it to grow as well, it's going to be really hard with everything else growing in dead wood. I wouldn't even take a sample that's dead. As for adjacent trees, if the adjacent trees are alive and they are showing symptoms, then obviously, yes, you know, those can get cultured from easily. But obviously dead wood, you know, you can't culture from that. I couldn't hear all of your question. You kind of cut out there a bit. So I'm kind of just hoping that answers what you're kind of saying, but not sure it is.
The concern is if we had a tree that died recently, you know, it's definitely dead, but picture a tree that has defoliated, and you interview the client and maybe the neighbors, and the history of death and decline seems to indicate oak wilt. What we're trying to solve for in that scenario are two things. One is, how do you dispose of the tree that just died that may still be a source of infection, right? Are you gonna, because we're gonna cut that tree down and haul it across town to our yard or some other place in logs and log form. And that wouldn't be acceptable if it were a tree that actually did die of oak wilt. The second point is, what about adjacent trees that may be root grafted? Do we recommend treatment or not? And so lots of times we're looking at a tree that might not be alive still, but we still need to know how to approach that correctly. That's a bit of an oddball situation, but I'll tell you, it happens more often than you would realize.
So I don't know if this would be as helpful, but it might be. Depending on the tree, say it's a red oak. If you look at the dead branches and pull away the bark, usually red oak is very good at showing streaking. And if the tree died because of oak wilt, that would still be there. Now, if it's been dead for a long time, you might not notice it as much. But I know that red oak, most of the red oaks that come into our lab are textbook when it comes to the streaking. And it's like, you see that streaking, and technically, I mean, we still culture obviously, but when I see that, I'm like, okay, that looks like oak wilt to me. So if you're, you know, you see a tree and it's completely dead, maybe it didn't die a few years ago, but if it just recently died, you could start peeling back that bark and see if you see any of that streaking. And that could be a helpful indicator if you can't get a good sample to get tested.
Most of the samples that we get, I would say, do not have great symptoms. We get a lot of samples from people that are worried about oak wilt, but the tree, honestly, the sample will look perfectly healthy, or they'll say, I think my tree died of oak wilt, and the sample is just so dry and dead we can't cut from it. So I think PCR is pretty useful for us most of the time, because we just can't culture. We either know we won't get anything, or we know we'll get every saprophyte that's just going to grow really fast. So where we're at.
If I could just real quick, when I get landowners that ask me to come out this time of year to look for oak wilt, they got a dead tree. Even if I say I took a sample and sent it in, I have a hard time recommending any management decisions because I don't know how far that has spread underground through the root system. So for me to be like, okay, well, that tree needs to go and that tree needs to go, I don't know if it's got to that tree, and this year that tree will be up there, and then we're just going back and doing it again and again and again and not getting great results, instead of waiting until the summer when I can actually see symptoms going on and make a good management decision. I guess that's how I do it, and I could be completely wrong. So
I agree with you. Root grafts make this just a huge cluster for management.
Yep. So kind of to wrap up the diagnostics and detection thing, with what we need to know, we need to make sure we're sending in reliable samples, and that everybody has to send in reliable samples, that we're sending the samples to the labs that aren't going to give us false positives or false negatives. So there needs to be, it sounds like there needs to be a little bit more standardized stuff. And then from there we can manage it, but there needs to be an understanding that it's beyond just the ground zero. We also need to be able, that detection is so critical in us figuring out and delineating. So the mapping is important. We need the mapping, but we need to make sure we're mapping the right stuff.
Right.
And until that is addressed, we got a problem that we're gonna keep fighting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's critical. That's the first step, is confirming it and making sure it's confirmed appropriately and correctly. So yeah, that's going to be really important. I think we'll keep working on this into the future and keep talking and figure out how to improve upon that. So I did want to touch on then kind of the other side of it. You know, once it's confirmed, the response, the management, the containment side of it. So, you know, I'll say we've kind of been dealing with oak wilt for the last 3 years or so, more or less. And I know Ryan Klester has really been seeing a lot of it out in his part of the state in Eastern Ohio. And obviously the folks up in Toledo are seeing it. So, you know, obviously the tried and true gold standard is the root graft, or the trenching, you know, severing those root grafts. But as we were kind of discussing earlier, there is work and potential use for fertile and herbicide to try to slow or stop the spread of it. So I just wanted to kind of talk about what's been done, and I don't know what folks think the best management recommendations are moving forward. You know, because that I kind of see the need, obviously, like we've talked about, for doing some trainings. And if we start doing these trainings, I want to make sure, obviously, we talk about getting good samples and identification of oak wilt symptoms, but also what's the recommendation for managing that infestation when you identify it. So I don't, maybe Lorraine and Tim, do you guys want to talk about how you've tackled it, and what you see as challenges to the management that you've done? Oh, someone has a hand raised. Oh, Chad. Go ahead, Chad.
Okay, apologize for my elementary question, but we do not have tree climbers, in our agency currently. So from that perspective, just a basic question, what is the best way to collect a tree or twig sample to be able to, send a fresh, sample into the lab? Is the best situation just to drop the tree? Or how are others dealing with this?
Shotgun.
I tried to get my boss to let me do that and he wouldn't let me do it.
Can I suggest something to you, Chad?
Sure.
One way you can do it is if you cannot get up, if it's a large red oak, for example, you can wait until you mark that tree, you wait until winter, and then you can either late winter go in and take a wedge sample or take a hatchet even and open up the bark and dig out a wood sample, and that could be submitted to the diagnostic lab. The diagnostic lab at Purdue University, for example, they do this, and I'm not sure if OSU and ODA have handled such lower stem samples, but they work. In Texas, they do a lot of root samples. But it takes the fungus a while to move down. You see the crown wilt in the summer, but it's not until the next spring or late winter that the fungus will have moved down into the root collar and root system. So that's what we advise people in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa to do is just wait then and sample in the late winter and take that wedge, or depending on what tool you have, a hatchet or a chainsaw. And we have a protocol. And I will mention that Linda Haugen with State and Private Forestry, U.S. Forest Service, will be posting a oak wilt story map that covers just various options for dealing with oak wilt across the central northeastern region, and it has a lot of options in there for treatments. And I guess when Linda and I put that together, we felt that our message was one size does not fit all for treatment. And look at what other people have done, and in my experience, you make a prescription for your site. What you do in Toledo Parks would be very, very different than what you would do in southeastern Ohio. Very different soils and topography.
Jennifer, would you be so kind as to share that protocol? Because no, we do not take wedges from the trunk.
Yes, I can do that. We had a workshop with, before COVID lockdown, we had a workshop at CPAC, Purdue University's Southeast Ag Station, and we talked about that, and the foresters were excited about it. So yep, we have a protocol. I can send that to you in PDF form.
So I will say at Metro Parks, we've been able to get some samples with just really long pole pruners, but we have done methods where we just, if we're able to cut the tree down without doing any collateral damage to other oak trees, which is a challenge, we have done that method too. Just cut the tree down and take the sample.
And that works very well.
Yeah. We know the tree's coming down anyways, so just dig it down now.
Depends on your situation.
Yep, good discussion there. Thanks for the question, Chad. So yeah, I was wondering maybe we could start by just getting, Lorraine, Tim, if you have anything to share on what you found as far as challenges, successes with your oak wilt management, how you tackle that on the ground.
So I will say, so we've started, we don't know exactly how long we've had oak wilt in our parks. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say it's been there for a long time. And even in some of the areas where we thought we had it and it wasn't positively diagnosed, but in hindsight, we're pretty sure that's what it was. But we've done, in 2014, we started doing the vibratory plow trenching. And that's works. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that that's very successful. It's easy for us to do. We have really flat topography. We have the sandy soils. it's a really easy management tool for us, and I feel very confident that it works really well. The challenge has been, and I think this is a mistake that we made, and anyone that has oak wilt new to their area, I think the mistake we made from the get-go was not being aggressive enough. We've never cut to the line. So we've always only sanitized the trees that died that current year. So trying to stop that above ground spread. But by not cutting to the line, you're just allowing the disease to fester. Basically, you're feeding it. You're continuing to feed the disease. You know, in those decisions where, I mean, even though, you know, we are urban forests, so those were decisions that were made based on, you know, public perception and things like that. So if you have the ability to cut to the line, I would certainly go that route. I think Jenny has maybe a comment. I see you.
Yeah, two comments. I know someone mentioned that Three Rivers Park District in Minnesota was kind of contacted about when you were starting your program, and that's great. They chose not to cut to the line. You probably know that, and that's probably why you started your protocol. And that's because not all trees within a barrier line will be grafted. All red oaks will not be grafted, and their value was to maintain as many trees as possible. They knew that they would have some failures. So, you know, it comes down to what your management, what you're managing for, you know. You can, and then when you cut to the line, I think you have to think about where you place that line. Line placement is crucial. If you're going to just take a mathematical model and go out, in a neighborhood, urban situation, you could be in a lot two neighbors down. And so, you know, I think we haven't even touched on that, is what root graft barrier line model you're going to use. And there are advantages and disadvantages of using a rule of thumb model versus using a mathematical model.
So yeah, that's all good. And it brings me to, you know, I mean, I don't know how, I think, Lorraine, haven't you guys had challenges getting that equipment that's necessary to even do that?
Yes, so that's been our up until this year. So last year we were just right on the edge. They didn't think that they were going to have a Ditch Witch vibratory plow that we could utilize. Now we don't need the plow. We actually have the plow. We just need the machine. They did not think they were going to have one for us last year. Last minute, someone brought one in early and we were able to get one. This year we were not able to rent one. So there was, you know, just that supply and demand issues, and we were unable to get a hold of a plow this year. So that's been a challenge. And I think talking to Ditch Witch, it sounds like it's going to continue to be a challenge, because they said that you know, the demand for that machine because of oak wilt, some of it's because of oak wilt and some of it's also because of all of the fiber optic lines that are getting laid right now. So that's creating a higher demand on that specific machine too. So that's been a real challenge. And we've, you know, when we get the machine, we will partner. So we've partnered with DNR, we partnered with Sylvania City, and we've partnered with a nearby camp. So we'll partner to help other agencies utilize the machine also. But it is a challenge. It's also a challenge. You know, we can contract it. We've gotten to the point they changed the machine model that they utilize, and so it's heavier. It's a bigger machine now. So we ran into the challenge also of now we have to contract out our mobilization too. So, which is not that big of a deal, but it does, you know, it just makes it logistically, it's just a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, and so from everything I know, I think you guys there at Toledo Metro Parks are the farthest along in doing that type of work of anyone in the state. So, you know, I think for new people wanting to do that, it's a huge challenge and a huge undertaking to try to, I don't even know how available that equipment is for a private landowner, for example, to do something like that. So that's a huge barrier to, in my mind, for actually getting management done on the ground, just all the logistics that it takes to carry out that type of an operation. So that's why, I think we've been really interested, at least, in the unglaciated part of the state, in the other option of potentially using herbicides to contain oak wilt pockets. But, like Jenny mentioned earlier, it's not as effective as trenching, and especially if you're dealing with a large oak wilt pocket, it's not always effective at containing it. But like, I know, Ryan, you have done a lot of this, trying this out in Eastern Ohio with the girdle herbicide method that we've heard about. So I don't know, Ryan, do you have anything to share on that? How you think that has worked?
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm more aggressive than less, because the terrain's just not going to allow for this vibratory plow in a lot of these places, like Yellow Creek State Forest. I mean, we had to hike chainsaws in a mile with herbicide just to get back into the spot to start to work. And then, you have to go across private landowners or just different situations. And then it's just too steep. And then when you're dealing with trees in the forest versus trees in a park setting, I mean, the spacing is going to be different. And I guess this is kind of one of my takeaways, is a lot of the research articles that I've read in the results section say we might not have gone out far enough, or I guess they didn't go out far enough because the soil type, they were misjudging it. So I kind of maybe went out further than what it said, just by a little bit or a little bit more. And we girdled an herbicide, and I've been doing this for, I guess, 4 years now, and a lot of the spots I've been going back to, but that I haven't been seeing it. Some, yes, I have, and that's because I can't get everybody to do everything they're going to say they're going to do. Private landowners will tell me, yes, we'll do it, and I'll tell them till I'm blue in the face. I'll send them emails, I'll write them a letter, and I will tell them to their face what they need to do, and they'll shake their head, yes, they understood, and then they're out, doing a timber sale in July when I said, let's not do that. And I can't get everybody on the same page is one of the problems I have, but that's a unique situation, I think, to me here, because I'm dealing with private landowners mostly.
Something?
Yeah.
One of my suggestions as we begin moving forward is that we separate out forest management, even Toledo Metro Parks, most of those they're forest management, not urban forest in the true sense where you have homes and buildings and structures and streets and curbs.
Very different.
And the way we have to manage those areas is very different politically, and the equipment is going to be very different that we need in here. And so when we're talking about management, we're kind of overlapping a little bit, which is kind of confusing. And so one of the suggestions I would make is to have maybe an urban forestry working group and then a forest management, more traditional forest woodland situation management.
Yeah.
And because we have to trench in most of our places in our urban areas, but that also means you need to have a coordinator who's working with all the homeowners or residents. That's why Amy has been so important. She's served as that person in Lucas County. Few communities in Ohio have that capacity to manage it. We don't have people in the private sector who can manage those things. They're used to dealing with trees and one homeowner at a time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm gonna have to work with all the politicians too. So that, it's a very different animal. And so, and what the tools that we're gonna need that haven't been there and aren't there now, there's gonna have to be coordination, I think, and some planning to be able to get those into these urban areas, villages, cities, developing townships. Because the communities don't have the capacity to do this on their own. They're with tracks. going to be a lot of facilitating that's going to be necessary to help these communities through this if this continues to rise like it has. So I really like Michigan's model. They help facilitate a lot of that, but it also includes making sure you have trained arborists to oversee that work and do that coordination. That is key. It's not going to work otherwise.
Right. Yeah, and what I found really interesting, what they're doing in Michigan is they have this, you know, oak wilt certification that arborists can get. I think it's like requires like a 2-day training, and then they can get that on, I don't know how it would work on their license or something, that shows them as a oak wilt management certified.
And they're the only one, yeah, and they're the only ones that can oversee this urban and oak wilt mitigation so that they're not overprescribing or underprescribing.
Yeah.
And, but the communication has to be there. Otherwise it'll fall apart, or people will stop, and now the dead trees, and now you have insurance rates, and you all kinds of things that come into play in urban centers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michigan has the Oak Wilt Coalition, which was really spearheaded, I think, by the Michigan Society of Arboriculture. So, you know, that's something where maybe arborists in Ohio may be interested in getting more involved. But it's worked very well in the urban, suburban, small town areas.
They've offered to help us down here get that set up.
That's great. Yeah. I think that's part of their success is to have that coalition. And they've had discussions with utilities as well, utility companies.
Then do they have relationships or specific certifications that sawmills have also?
These aren't usually going to go to sawmills. So it's mostly disposal. It's just not feasible. So not necessarily not for urban trees. The reality of it is that it depends on how close you are and what the local markets are. If you go to create temporary markets to address a problem, it's not sustainable, which is what we saw with Emerald Ash Borer. There are all kinds of businesses that grew out of that. None of them are left because they're unsustainable. And so what we seek to do in Ohio, which is very different from what the U.S. Forest Service promotes oftentimes and other states do, is okay, let's partner communities with wood utilization programs, whether it's a logger or a wood mill or a incinerator, whatever it is, firewood, whatever, that's nearby. Because the more you handle the wood, the more you have to pay the next person you have to buy lunch for, and it just adds up. It's just not something that moving urban wood isn't. Arborists don't have the capacity to move the wood and to log it, and loggers don't have the capacity to work in urban areas. And so it's just not feasible and realistic, unless you're talking about a woodland situation.
So in Michigan, an arborist that's certified, that has like an Oak Wilt certification, part of that certification would basically be stating that I am disposing of this wood properly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the people that oversee it and are part of their program have that certification. So they're working out there ethically and following best management practices and all that stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
They've got the blades that are fabricated up there too. So there are always blades available, and they have a contract with Ditch Witch to be able to make sure that they have that equipment to put the blades onto for a certain period of time every year. But that was the only way that they found they could facilitate this in cities up there, the villages and cities down here.
Yeah, that's.
I have a quick question then, you know, as we're sort of talking a bit about this dichotomy between those of us that have oak wilt in more natural settings, and to my knowledge, that I'm just nod heads if I'm right in this statement, there are 3 locations. There's Northwestern Ohio, which is a combination of Maumee State Forest and Oak Openings region that the metro parks have. What Ryan is managing at Yellow Creek, and what I'm managing in northeastern Ohio on our park systems. Are there any other natural areas that otherwise have oak wilt?
Yeah.
Allen County Park District.
Yep, we confirmed, we got samples from a landowner down in Washington County near Marietta. It's
County.
kind of a forested area. It was, I mean, at least an acre worth of dead and dying oaks down there. Yeah, we've confirmed it down near between Chillicothe and Circleville on a landowner. It was sort of he had planted a lot of oaks back in early 2000s.
Right outside of Shawnee State Forest, there was some.
Yeah, so
Tioga County.
we know of it kind of all over the place.
All 5 of my counties well, now 4 counties, but all 5 when I had 5 counties had it. Every single one of them. I got positive samples from.
I think if we're looking for it more, we would find it more.
Mhm.
But thus far, are all of those locations currently managing, or what we're providing here in our context, or are we the ones, like Metro Parks has had it the longest, you know, and then Ryan's effort at Yellow Creek and our effort in the last handful of years? Are there any other records or management that's occurred previously?
County Park District did a mitigation 2 summers ago,
And
2 winters ago, I guess, the last winter.
I know of some of those that I mentioned on private land that have not yet taken action on it. So I mean, we'll be advising them and working with them. We're limited in what we're able to provide, but we'll at least provide them with technical guidance on what we recommend they do.
But we're all still within a 5-year window. Right? I mean,
Yeah,
we've all been sort of doing, right.
Yeah.
So all still relatively recent.
And then there's also landowners that are unwilling to do anything. Like I
Right.
try to get, there's one in Mahoning County in particular, beautiful red oak trees. There's probably 3 pockets across the 25 acres, and it's 3 siblings. 2 of them are on board. One of them absolutely will not. She said she'd rather see those trees rot back into the soil than go on a log truck or have anything happen to them. She just thinks it needs to do whatever. So I can only do so much.
I've experienced something very similar in the more urban context. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It's really difficult when it's your neighbor's trees too, that you go into a development that has red oaks in every backyard, and it's spreading from yard to yard, and not everyone cares. Yeah.
Most municipalities have in their ordinance the right to go in and control that.
Yeah.
And so, okay, are we as a municipality going to try and control this or not? And you need to be able to have somebody there to coordinate that with the municipality, because they don't, as well as these private trees, and because a lot of private trees will pose a public risk if they let it go. So they're going to be paying for it either way. And so, yeah, that's where this whole education part comes in, and being able to facilitate this and helping these communities make those really tough decisions to do what needs to be done for public safety and well-being. So, yeah, but on the woodland situation, we don't have the right to do that. But in municipalities, absolutely, they have the right to go in and control this on private property.
And I think one of the challenges is just that timeline is tight. You know, if your tree died, we need to make sure that we're sanitizing that within that, you know, that next or during the winter or dormant season. And there are a lot of landowners that just don't recognize it maybe until the disease becomes more prominent, or they don't have the money. We have a lot of poverty in the oak openings region. They certainly don't have, you know, the money to remove a tree. They probably would love to have the firewood, but just removal. I mean, some of these are big, giant, beautiful oak trees that they just don't have the money to even hire an arborist to help them get it down.
So I guess then, we're getting close to ending time here, but, you know, from all of our discussions, it sounds like there's certainly a need to do more education and training. So, you know, and I guess like we were just saying, it's definitely a different animal when you're talking about kind of urban yard tree situation versus a more rural forest situation. So maybe we look at training specific to those situations, and try to invite folks that work in those two worlds to these trainings maybe. Because I know I've already talked with some folks about just throwing the idea out there of let's do a training at an oak wilt site in the field, get people to see what the symptoms look like, talk about, you know, getting a quality sample, the testing, confirmation, all the way down to what's the management recommendations. And if there's ways to show that being done in the field, I think that would be great. So, yeah, I don't know if anybody has thoughts on putting on trainings. Is that kind of a next step? Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Tom, the training that you and I went to in Wisconsin and Minnesota, what was it, 2019? That was an excellent training. If we could mimic something like that here in Ohio, would definitely be beneficial. I've got plenty of locations I can take landowner or take professionals to. I've got a spot in Carroll County that's got Chinese chestnuts that have it in there that most people probably haven't seen, I would suppose. I've got landowners where we've done, you know, it was an 11-acre clear cut because it just all of them were running through it. He had 38 to 40-inch diameter oaks, just incredible stuff in there that was just dying left and right. I'm sure he'll let us go in there, and they're easily accessible sites. I just have to get permission, but I would need some help, obviously, with some of this.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, I think we could maybe try to offer some regionally to make it easier for folks to get to. But yeah, I think timing wise, like if we could do it when symptoms are there and visible, like, you know, midsummer to early fall, somewhere in there would maybe be optimal timing to do that.
Well, I think what you look at too is what is your audience and what is your goal?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, if you're talking about the urban audience, that's going to be different from Ryan's audience.
Right.
And so, and the goals are going to be different. But we need to have a capacity to help facilitate the work that needs to be done after it's diagnosed in urban. Don't have that in Ohio. Because all the towns are going to tell me, I've been preaching about oak wilt for years. Amy and I, yeah, we were at the woods in Holland at one of my conferences, how many, 15 years ago, maybe 18, something like that. They know about it. It's like, okay, I got it. What the hell do I do?
Right.
Nobody around here has anything to help us, and we can't afford the herbicide. We can't do this. We need to be able to facilitate it in urban centers. So the education is big, and maybe we need to look at educating the utility folks and the arborists that are working in the cities for the diagnostics. But that we can't out on helping facilitate the work that needs to be done in our municipalities.
I would kind of tweeze out utility foresters in that too, because a lot of times they're the ones writing the contracts for the utility companies, and they're just executing their contracts. So we need to go to who's writing the contract. CRT, utility forestry company.
The utilities write their own utility contracts.
But they use a forester, right?
No, they're not foresters anymore. Most of them are.
So we have capacity at Metro Parks to do any kind of training in August, September. And we, you know, everything is really close. So we have the capacity to both have, you know, some sort of indoor portion, presentation, whatever it might be, to you know, to do both that, and then literally right next to, you know, any of that indoor facility, we have really easy access to any of our oak wilt sites. And that could be at Oak Openings Preserve or Wildwood Preserve pretty easily. And I know it is it's interesting because, you know, we've had oak wilt in, you know, pretty prominently in the Oak Openings region for a long time now. And it's interesting, even talking to my conservation partners, they still don't know how to, they have challenges just with that visual ID. So that's one of the things that they really want some training on, going out in August and September and looking for the disease. So we definitely can, I mean, I think we can definitely put something on the calendar at Metro Parks if we want to do a training in Northwest Ohio.
To add to that, Tom, I guess I was kind of hearing, and I'm kind of speak for the parks in general in Ohio, is it's not a cookie cutter management practice, dealing with this. We deal with it in woodland settings, but we also kind of hybrid into, an urban, when it gets into infrastructure in some of our urban parks or even our non-urban parks. So I guess I don't want to be excluded from conversations and talking about management strategies and so forth from a park district standpoint. Even talking with our neighbors, we have thousands of neighbors that abut our parks and look to us as the leader in management of Oak Wilt. So I guess I just kind of thinking about that. I was kind of hearing maybe we were going to separate a little bit as far as, forest settings and urban, but if parks in general could kind of be looped in on both, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense.
And I think another approach that, is to really have the homeowner or the public interest and do education, because every year I get phone calls from residents that have dead and dying oaks that are upset during the growing season because they're, or even healthy oak trees in this case, but they want somebody to come out and prune their tree. The company has said, no, we will not touch your tree. And so they're calling me and saying, can't you make them do that? And I'm like, no, you are you're speaking to a reliable company. But at the same time, we know that there are companies that they don't care what time of the year it is and they're pruning. So encouraging homeowners to know kind of that don't prune during the growing season. I know that's kind of a wide window, and some of the research says we can narrow down that a little bit, but I tend to go for that wide window. But kind of that in our messaging. So at different levels, so we can try to reach everybody.
Yep, totally agree. I mean, just educating to the general public is a really big piece of that too, not just professionals that work on trees.
Work, were you talking about technical facilitation or also financial?
Well, I don't know financially. What we do with the Division of Forestry is help communities facilitate their urban forestry programs. And this is a big piece to that. When that stuff is found in a community, it's a big deal. And so our belief is that urban forestry communities that invest in their own urban forest have bigger payoffs, and they need to plan for these kinds of things. But you get communities that get caught off guard if they don't have the ability to pay for it. I don't know how this is going to work. That may be something we have to seek out. We have a lot of communities that are in real dire straits financially. I don't know what.
Yeah.
That, but it's a big problem.
Yeah, and getting this group together, hopefully we can continue, future meetings and brainstorming, coming up with creative ideas to help get that work done. So
yeah, one thing that we did it during Emerald Ash Borer. We had grants to help communities facilitate their ash removal, but they had to manage it. And we worked with them to get them to that point, and they had to show that. And it was a good learning experience for them. I can't imagine we would veer from that at all, right? We'd give out money willy-nilly, but that was thanks to the Forest Service and Marcy Captor who did that. And one of the challenges that we have in urban forestry is so many of the grants go to plant, and not manage. Mm-hmm. And so we really struggle with that. These towns, they don't need more trees right now. They need to manage what they've got. And so that's a bigger problem we've been struggling with for decades.
So is there money there, do you think, where municipalities could get grants for Oakville currently?
There's Forest Service funding that we could go after. There's different pest and disease grants out there that, if we could put proposals together for and apply for. So there's potential funding, I think, if we wanted to try to pursue that. So we're noon now. Here in Columbus, they test the tornado sirens every Wednesday at noon. So we've got that reminding us that it's 12 o'clock. Yeah, just want to thank everybody for coming and providing your insights and thoughts on this. I think we've got a lot of great stuff to work on. Obviously, this is a complex issue, and it's going to take collaboration to come up with good solutions on it. So does anybody have closing thoughts or ideas on moving forward? I'll keep working on stuff and reach out to people on things that have been brought up to think about going forward. But hopefully before too long, I'll try to convene us all again so we can keep building on this. But I think it was a good initial meeting and discussion.
I just have a couple things. Jennifer, I don't know if you prefer Jennifer or Jenny, I'm not sure. But you had mentioned there's a working group that was talking about the lab in Texas, and that there's also they were talking about the NPDN labs having a standardized protocol for oak wilt. Is this something that you could invite other people to, or is it kind of a closed group? I deal with NPDN a lot, but I hadn't heard about this group, so I was just curious if that was something that I'd be able to sit in on.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I can't remember even your name plus which lab.
It's Colette. No worries.
At the OSU lab, not the ODA.
No, the Ohio Department of Ag.
The ODA lab. So you're not part of NPDN.
Not in the normal sense, no.
Yeah, OSU lab is part of NPDN.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm not part of NPDN either, but they invited me to their first meeting. It's committee or a subgroup or something of NPDN, the network, the diagnostic and testing committee or something. So
is it the protocol? Is it the protocol committee? Because there is one that I know that they have one for protocols. Is that?
No, well, it's got a longer name, whatever it is. I just got the invitation either this morning or yesterday to join their meeting. No worries. But yeah, I would think if they invited me, I don't see why they couldn't invite you. If you could send me your email, I can
sure.
I can send you what they sent me, and you could contact that person. I was invited to speak at the national meeting of the NPDN in
California.
In California, and this is what's been on my mind. This is the issue that needs to be talked about, the standardization and starting with sampling, not just what you do in the lab with the sample,
right,
and all the way to interpretation of results. So I was given permission just last week to broaden my talk, and so this all fits together, because then the idea is to get this NPDN subcommittee to come up with some standard protocol. And I'm going to recommend it starts at sampling. How does a person in the field take a sample, all the way to how does, say, Davy Tree interpret the results that they get from different labs. I get calls from all over Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio about conflicting results. And so, yeah, but I think, getting back to your question, I think that you could probably participate in this committee's work on this topic. If they invited me, I don't see why they couldn't invite you.
Awesome.
So I can forward that message to you if you can send me an email.
Yeah. And then I had another question. You mentioned a lab in Canada. that has a protocol that is similar to the lab in Texas. Do you by chance, could you send, when I send you an email, could you also send the lab's name? I have a contact in Canada that deals with oak wilt, and I wasn't sure if maybe they were in the same facility. And then for Rachel, the protocol that you use for your PCR, would you mind sharing that as well?
Yeah, I can do that.
And I believe that protocol for the nested PCR was one developed by a grad student of mine back in 2014. So it's published, but labs have improved on it. So I'm sure Rachel will send you an improved version. But the protocol in Canada is actually a multiplex PCR, qPCR method. And I don't know if any lab is actually using it operationally, but it was a research paper, but I can send you that paper.
It's not oh, I can't remember the name of it's not one of the university labs up there, is it?
I think
the
it
University of Guelph. Is it the University of Guelph?
No, that multiplex qPCR protocol was actually a consortium of Natural Resources Canada labs, I believe.
Okay.
But anyway, I'll send you the paper and then you'll have the names.
Perfect. Thank you so
I
much.
provided samples for some of what they did for that.
I wanted to say too, if there's anyone on the call that has a lot of, or any experience that you have with the above ground sanitation, I think that's been another real, it's been just a challenge for us, just dealing with all of the wood. It's definitely becoming a bigger challenge because every year we have more and more trees. This year we have 225 dead trees that we need to sanitize. So anyone that would be willing to have some conversations with me about kind of the methods they're using would be really helpful for me.
I'm scheduled to give a webinar on the topic of oak wilt. So that will be primarily arborists tuning in to get some continuing education units to maintain their certification. I welcome current photographs, like some of the sites that you've all been describing. Sound like some photos I would love to see. If you're willing to share them, I could put them in my PowerPoint and credit you. So maybe Tom, can you help coordinate that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have some we could definitely share with you.
Awesome.
But yeah, we'll see if others have others that they could contribute.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I'll be in touch, and I'll also kind of just get everyone's thoughts on how or if they want to be involved going forward on some of this stuff. So, and feel free to share if you think we're missing folks. Obviously, we did discuss that a little bit with utility companies and contractors, but yeah, please keep in touch. Let me know what you thought, if you have any additional feedback, and otherwise we'll keep moving forward with some of the stuff we talked about and keep talking. So appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.